Hello everybody, today I am driving what could be one of the most important models currently in the BMW lineup. I know that the M2 CS may be the flavour du jour, but in fact there's an awful lot of people out there for whom the M models are simply not the car that they want, and for a number of different reasons. The running costs, insurance, servicing, fuel, all that kind of stuff may be just a little bit too much. They may not need or want the performance that those cars offer, and of course there's the small issue of the price of buying one. For a lot of people out there who are going to use their car on a more frequent basis, it could make an awful lot more sense to buy something a bit like this M240i. And on paper, it has an awful lot going for it. It's a reasonably compact car, similar in dimensions to a 3 Series of many years ago, so it has just about enough room in it for 4 adults. It's got a reasonably sized boot, and more importantly, up front, you have a classic BMW powertrain, the B58, perhaps one of the last great combustion engines we're ever likely to see, producing here a very healthy 330-ish horsepower and a chunky 369 pound-feet of torque. Notably, that's more torque than the original M2 actually made, and only down on power by about 30 odd horses. Rewind a few years back and my E46 330 was 110 horsepower clear of the M3. This particular car has been loaned to me today by its kind owner, Chris, and he's had it from new, in which time he's covered just over 53,000, happy to say, fault-free miles. He specified it in what I think we could pretty much call a purist way. It has the manual 6-speed gearbox down here, no ZF 8-speed, and the only options boxes he really ticked were for the Estoril blue paintwork. Love that. It has folding wing mirrors, heated seat at the front, parking sensors, and that's about it. It's worth noting that the manual is certainly a rare thing. In fact, the autos outsold it by something like 10 to 1. Mercifully for an M240i, this is in fact completely standard. In fact, the only thing really worth noting is the fact that it's currently on winter tyres. Continentals, I believe. And I've got to say, I've been driving this car for about 15-20 minutes before beginning filming, and I'm really impressed with the grip level provided by these tyres. If you do have an M140 or 240 or anything like that, I'd really recommend getting a set of winters on the car, because they make a dramatic difference, especially with temperatures as low as they are. The car says it's 2 degrees now, and that's the highest temperature I've seen all day. Earlier it was reportedly -3, which is very chilly for the United Kingdom. The M240i, I think, is a very good looking car. It wears its dimensions pretty well. It looks just the right amount of sharp. It's not too shouty or aggressive, that of course being the job of the M2. While I was filming, I happened to spot one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, but the car wasn't too bad. The 2 Series does have some odd quirks. The strangest one was always the fact that they chose to kink the seats inwards. I believe that was to meet some sort of safety legislation. And if you're even remotely chunky of thigh, like I am, you'll find that your right leg is constantly sitting on the bolster, which isn't particularly comfortable over extended distances. The suspension in this car isn't harsh, it's not overly firm, it is a passive setup, but at low speeds there is some choppiness to the ride. The gearbox is quite notchy, surprisingly so, but easy enough to use. The clutch, brake and accelerator are all fairly light, as is the steering. If you haven't had a German car before, don't expect anything to come as standard with these. In fact, the sat-nav screen here is the regular one. There is an optional upgraded nav, which gives you a much bigger display. This one looks rather embarrassed, sat there in the center console. Ooh. These cars, the 135, 140, 240 and so on, have a reputation for tail happiness in anything other than perfect conditions, and it's a reputation that is fairly well deserved. Nearly 370 pound-foot of torque through the 2 rear wheels with no limited slip diff will sort of do that. However, if you can get the thing lined up, you get your foot down, and it's a reasonably brisk car. I can feel the power being bled away though. I recall these being much quicker, and I'm 99% certain that the traction control is intervening somewhat here. That being said, it's not the undrivable mess that quite a few other cars might be. AMG CLK, I am looking at you. Once over about 50 miles an hour, the suspension all sort of comes together and the car really does begin to flow. It's actually quite an enjoyable experience, and you can carry quite a bit of pace. She's not struggling as much as I thought she might. One curious thing about this car is that if you have it in Sport or Sport Plus, you are going to have the car doing rev matching for you, and there is no way to disable that. None. It's a very strange thing for BMW to have done, because if you're going to have gone to the effort of buying one of these with a manual gearbox, surely one of the reasons you'd have done that is because you want to enjoy the real driving experience, the interaction of having 3 pedals. So taking away the ability to heel and toe for yourself really seems a little bit backwards to me. I don't mind it being there as an option, but really I would like you to be able to just disable it. The engine makes a very pleasant noise. It's not especially shouty, particularly here in standard guise, but it gets the job done. One thing I have to say for the B58 is it's ludicrously economical. I have the 130i, which has one of the predecessors to this engine, the plain old M52. So 3 litre straight 6, no turbos or anything like that, 265 horsepower, and I'll average probably about sort of 31, 32 to the gallon. This has been averaging closer to 34, and I know it gets driven enthusiastically. On a run, it is not at all unheard of for people driving cars with this engine in to get over 40 to the gallon, and that's people I know with the 440i, a much bigger, heavier car. The chassis in the 240 really is quite good. It's fairly playful, the car seems eager to turn in fact this seems much more agile than the M2 comp that I drove not too long ago, which furthers my suspicion that perhaps something was wrong with that particular car. I can say at the very least that the rev matching is good. I have driven a few cars, like the GR Yaris, where it isn't always done very well, and that's really frustrating. Mercifully here, BMW seem to get it pretty bang on. The bass stereo is certainly an improvement over the old business CD units of yore. And fortunately, by this era, you did get sat-nav, Bluetooth and stuff like that as standard. For a very long time, BMW refused to put sat-nav even in their top-end cars. 10 years ago, a £60,000 6 Series wouldn't have come with it. Visibility out is really good. There's A-pillars on the thick side. You've got a great view of the bonnet. Rear visibility is decent. Rear 3/4 is not that bad, depending on how your passenger seat is set. And it's definitely a car that you can make quick, easy progress in. However, there are, of course, some flaws. The steering, unfortunately, is one of them. It's like an embarrassingly drunken old relative at a party. There are flashes of brilliance, moments of sheer wisdom where it suddenly wakes up and everything really seems to work. And then it goes back to rambling about that time it went to Venezuela when it was in the Navy and nobody really knows what it's talking about. I'm willing to concede that the conditions and the tyres may be partly responsible for this, but I don't think they are entirely so. If you want a car to stand out, the 2 Series isn't really a great choice either. With their lower end cars, BMW don't really allow much at all in the way of customization. So you're going to have to pick from their pre-selected colour palette for exterior and interior. By and large, every 240i out there is gonna look a lot like this one. I suppose that is one reason they were so popular with the modifying crowd. And if you are going to buy one of these, I'd exercise some caution. Check that it hasn't been mucked around with too much in the past. A decent remap from a reputable company is nothing to worry about, and in many ways it can improve the car. The engine is extremely tractable from low down and pulls strong through the mid-range, but by the time you get to about 5,500 RPM, it really has no interest. It will go all the way to its 7,000 RPM red line quite happily, but there's no reason for you to do that. That's because, like its bigger turbocharged brothers, by the time you've got to about 4,000 RPM, the car's pretty much making peak power, and all that's happening is the torque is just sort of melting away. So it feels like you're slowing down, even though you're actually not. More good news comes in the form of the price. Now, this brand spanking new was just under £32,000, yet here, a few years later, you can pick one up from about 18 grand. That's a lot of car for not a lot of money. They have proven to be fairly durable, that engine is an absolute peach, and honestly, I think both gearboxes are good choices. I suspect if I was going to buy one of these as a daily, I probably would go for the ZF. I know, it's sacrilege, right? A proper petrol head owns a V12 manual Ferrari saying, no, I'd have an auto BMW. Because I would. That's just the kind of car I feel this wants to be. Something like this actually is a car I really genuinely believe was built for modifying. Everything about it feels like it's an excellent base, but it's chicken nuggets and chips. It's just a little bit plain. I want something with a bit more spice to it, a bit more bite. As standard, BMW also refused to fit these with a limited slip differential. That is a popular upgrade, and if you're a performance driver, I would say a very worthy one. You find moments like that where you sort of put your foot down, and what'll happen here on this road, we've got parts of the road dry, parts of them still somewhat frozen. With the limited slip diff, the car would probably be okay, but without it, you'll find one wheel just wants to spin up, and then it just doesn't really want to go anywhere, apart from potentially sideways, and that does ruin the enjoyment. I must confess I was somewhat worried about driving this car. I cancelled driving it once already because conditions really weren't suitable, and even today I was somewhat apprehensive because I thought it just was going to be horrible. I have driven 135s and stuff like that in the rain, and they've been just as bad as you thought they would. However, this really is quite good. Those Continental tyres really doing their job. Build quality seems pretty decent. The car at the very least isn't creaking, rattling or anything like that. After 5 years and 50,000 miles, if something here wasn't right, you'd probably know about it. I think there's people out there that would try and pretend something like this is going to be a future collectible, but honestly, seeing as in 20 years the government's probably going to come into our houses in the dead of night and steal all of our keys, I don't think that's really going to happen. That and the fact that they made way too many of these for it to become rare enough to be really desirable anytime in the near future. So it's little corners like that where you have to really be careful. You get in a car like this and you think, it's under power where the car's going to have issues with traction. Actually, no. It's when you're just going through a sort of slow, medium-speed corner and the front will just wash wide, just a touch. So it's still very much naturally geared towards understeer, road conditions almost certainly contributing to that. This corner though, whoa, yep, feel it slide around. That went from the back that time. I was going just a little bit quicker. Traffic coming. Yes, you can feel the car rotate around you. Traction control will come in. It's not anvil-like traction control. It's fairly smart. It gives you just the right amount of help that you need and lets you really get on with it. If you're cross-shopping one of these with something like an E92 M3, and I can see how you would be because they're now available for a similar price, should you buy one of these or one of those? Well, if you want the real proper M-car experience with all that brings, of course, get the E92. But as a normal, ordinary, daily driver, I'd say this is a far better car. It's going to cost a lot less to run in everything from fuel to tax to servicing, the whole lot. It's something of a Q car too, with just a couple of very inexpensive modifications. This is a real weapon. The steering is the low light. The engine in standard form I think is not as brilliant as it can be, but otherwise, as a package, I like the M240. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.